I'd like to start by looking at some definitions because there are many misconceptions of ADHD. This first definition is from Attitude. Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, ADHD, is a neurological disorder that impacts the parts of the brain that help us plan, focus on, and execute tasks. And then another definition here from one of the leading professionals in the field is Dr. Russell Barkley. He says people with ADHD have great difficulties with using their executive functions for purposes of self-regulation and attaining their goals. And we're going to explore a little bit more about what executive functions are throughout this training. Personally, I prefer to use the term differences rather than disorder, because as you will come to see if you're new to ADHD, it's not about children being broken. It's not about that they have something wrong with them. It's that their brains work in a very different way. So they just think and experience the world differently. Let's think about the causes of ADHD. So we know that genes are inherited from parents, and that from research, we know that children with ADHD have more copies of genes associated with ADHD traits. And actually, genes affect our chances of having ADHD almost as much as they affect how tall or short we will be. There are some environmental factors that increase the likelihood of having ADHD, for example, maternal smoking or drinking alcohol, but only alongside the ADHD type gene. So a baby would have to have the ADHD traits, the genes that carry those traits, as well as being exposed to those environmental factors. Those environmental factors alone don't create ADHD. But that's not to say that the environmental factors are a cause. It's something that just can increase the chances. Parenting and diet alone cannot cause ADHD, and this is a really important piece of information to take away with you, because when you're supporting children with ADHD, you're also going to be working with their parents, and many parents of children with ADHD will struggle themselves, and it's important that the teachers of their children understand that it's not necessarily because of poor parenting that their children are finding it hard to behave in a way that we would typically like to see. Traits of ADHD are typically seen before the age of 13 years, and for a diagnosis to be made, these traits have to significantly interfere with everyday life. We're all going to have traits, we're all going to have little quirks, and we're going to have times that we struggle to concentrate, times that our emotions get the better of us. This is part of normal development and life. But for a child with an ADHD brain, those traits really have a massive impact on every aspect of their life. It's also important to note that there are often other neurological differences in children with ADHD, for example, autism or dyslexia. So just bear this in mind when I'm later on making suggestions and recommendations. Some may need to be further adapted, particularly if, for example, a child has autism. The focus today is predominantly on ADHD, but there is quite a high co-occurrence, so do keep that in mind. So there are three main types of ADHD. When a diagnosis is made, sometimes a professional will say a child has ADHD, mostly inattentive. Sometimes it's called ADD, so it's the attention difficulties but without the hyperactivity part. The second type is ADHD, mostly hyperactive and impulsive. So that's the predominant concerns, the predominant issues that are affecting the child. And then sometimes the diagnosis is combined, where a child has inattentive and hyperactive impulsive traits, quite sort of evenly balanced, and this would be the most common type of diagnosis that children would receive. Now, the wide range of presentations can be confusing, and personally I think this is why children with ADHD are really, really hard to teach, because from one child to the next, and even over a period of time, the presenting symptoms and the needs are going to really, really vary. So what I'd like you to do now is just to have a think for a moment of some of the behaviours that you have seen in pupils that you work with, that you teach. If you're doing this training as a whole school inset, you might want to break up into pairs or into groups and just to have a chat for 5 minutes about the types of behaviours that you see in either a child you teach or that you know of within your school community. If you're watching this training individually, then just have a think and reflect on maybe a particular child or group of children that you might be concerned with or that you're wanting to find out how you can support. Think about what sort of behaviours do you see in those children.